Hi, evening everyone. My name is Naman. I was the chap who walked in late, as you would have noticed. Spilling a glass over Richard as soon as I walked in, so yeah, not a sudden entrance. I've been a property developer now for almost 5 years. Presently have a number of projects, 11 projects in total, some in construction, some in planning, some we're looking to purchase and looking at an exit on. And we do everything turnkey, from raising investment through to putting planning in, the whole construction phase, and now selling various bits of stock. Although it's not the best time to sell stock in the market, I'm sure you know. So yeah, welcome any questions that you have this evening, and lovely to catch up with everyone thereafter.
Great, guys. So I think it's over to you now. So let's see who's going to start to kick off with the first question. Dead silence, because the panel will go home if you don't have any questions. So
it's that time, isn't it?
So who's got the first question? Go on, Liz.
Richard, in your talk, I feel like at the end we nearly got to what your company did, but we didn't quite get there. You helped this guy, but I wasn't quite clear on how you'd helped him exactly and how you might be able to help people.
Thank you very much. An opportunity to promote myself. That's very kind. We raised the money. So we have two sides to the business. We have a brokerage side where we raise debt. Yeah. Our service when we're raising debt is pretty excellent. We don't just do an introductory service, which many brokers do. We'll actually manage the whole process from beginning to end, including lawyers and all those sorts of complicated bits. And then we've got another side of the business where we raise investment, we raise actual capital for developers. And that's really what the thrust of the presentation was about. So that project, Rupert's project, we raised £2 million of capital from professional investors, and we've raised £5.5 million of debt, so it's a £7.5 million total cost project, with the GDV just going north of 12 million now. So that's going to be super profitable for everyone involved. And we do the promotion. We're regulated, so we can actually promote property developments as an opportunity to invest, which incidentally, for those of you that don't know, I'm going to be geeky for a moment here, Section 21 of the Financial Promotion Order. You guys are no longer allowed to promote yourselves or your property developments as an opportunity for anybody else to invest. The FCA has taken that right away from you, insanely, in my opinion, even though it is good for us. Because, I'm a property developer as well, so I put my property development hat on and I say, well, why can't I stand up in front of this room full of people and say, hey, I've got a wonderful development and I'd like £100,000 of capital and I'll pay you 20%. Why can't I do that? Well, the FCA has decided that I'm not allowed to do that unless I'm regulated. So, as we're regulated, we are then allowed to do that. So we raise the money.
Next question, guys. Who'd like to ask the next question?
My question is to Naman. As a property developer, are you worried? Are you building new houses still, considering we are heading towards recession? Some people are saying.
I think you have to take a view in the market. I think a lot of companies are holding back. I think that's actually where the opportunity is. So we are where we were competing maybe with 9 or 10 developers on a site. Now we're competing with maybe 2 or 3. So that helps us. It also helps bring the price down. And I think the other thing that is so important is that vendors are more realistic in this market now compared to when you were in 2015, 2016. The market was at its peak, but everybody thought they could get bloody tower on their plot. So that's certainly helped us. And although GDVs have come down ever so slightly, and construction costs probably have gone up, site values have come down as well. The good thing is debt is still cheap. I think it will continue to be cheap. I think whoever comes in as the next Prime Minister will probably lower corporation tax. There's probably further benefit there. So I think if you look at it as a whole, I don't think it's all doom and gloom. And like I said, you just have to take a view. And I think the main thing, particularly for my business, is if we can put enough planning gain in, and then construct, we give ourselves enough of a buffer if things go wrong. I think the main thing is to make sure you have a plan B and a plan C in mind. So if you can't sell your stock for whatever reason, make sure you can refinance comfortably on a buy-to-let loan, ensure you can pay your principal back, hopefully get your equity back, and sit on your asset for a few years until the market picks up. I think if you can do that, then it's a good project to invest in.
May I jump in there as well?
Everyone's
Great.
welcome to.
So is everyone familiar with the company, the Barclay Group? Barclay Homes? Yeah? So I was fortunate enough to spend a little bit of time with Tony Pidgley beginning of the year, and he is bullish on UK property, which I think is tremendous, bearing in mind he's managed to navigate the property sector for the last 45 years very successfully. His company managed to make 750 million last year for its shareholders, and they have bought 12,000 sites over the last 12 months. So that is a massive vote of confidence in the UK property market. And this recession that everybody keeps on talking about, where is it? Where's it going to start? I mean, we don't have high unemployment. In fact, we have record employment. We have spectacularly low interest rates. Where's the problem? Our deficit is now under control. If the government would just get rid of in-work benefits, we would be level pegging. So can anybody tell me where this recession is, other than the fact that Deutsche Bank is finally going to go bust? that could be a leading moment, couldn't it? But where is it? Where's the problem? I don't know.
House prices going down. House prices.
Are going down? Where? According to whose statistics?
Yeah.
Nationwide said they went up 5% in the last 12 months. So, you know, the media is, are they responsible for sort of talking us into a recession? I don't know. Maybe I'm naive and foolish.
Natural cycles of the economy?
Yeah.
So I think what we're noticing from a planning perspective is we're getting a lot of clients who are building very large, high square footage properties, so the £1 million plus sale properties. They're struggling to sell. So because you've got the foreign investment market is walking away because of the uncertainty around Brexit. The bread and butter people of this country wanting to buy houses is still really, really high demand. So we're getting applications to split these big mansions into smaller four-bed houses, but just a terrace, so that developers can sell them on. So I think that where you've had a massive drop in very, very high value priced properties in London, it's disproportionately affecting the valuation of the whole market. So we've got Nationwide, who specialise in selling to just normal population, not the super high value ones. They're reporting a 5% increase in prices on the ground in terms of what people are seeing day to day.
Yeah, can I just add, legislation also has a huge part to play. I think the stamp duty hikes continually have certainly had an impact, particularly on the top end, like you mentioned. And secondly, what they've done to interest becoming non-tax deductible has also had a big impact. You know, a buy-to-let was traditionally the safest option for anyone, whether they have a dry cleaner shop or they have a 9-to-5 job. That's naturally what they would invest in. So they've crippled that market over the last year and a half, 2 years. But you know, a flick of a button, and things will change very quickly. So I think it's very important to notice that it's not down to necessarily the economy, but it's down to these small legislative changes over time that have incurred this.
I think you're absolutely right. You know, it started with George Osborne, didn't it? When he decimated the London market with his stamp duty changes. Did anybody notice that he just got a rather sweet appointment to a PRS fund as one of their directors on how much? What's he getting? Hundreds of thousands, no doubt. Doesn't that smack of a conflict of interest? Doesn't that seem a little bit suspicious to anyone? But look, we're about to have a new Prime Minister who has said that... Why is everybody laughing? Why is everybody laughing? Look, we're going to get... If we do... It does look like we're going to have Boris as Prime Minister, doesn't it? He's talking about reducing taxes and reversing the changes to stamp duty. Why is everybody laughing? We should be celebrating the fact that we're going to get this guy. bloody marvellous. For us as property people, do you agree?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think one of the things, obviously, I've just transitioned from being a residential landlord into a developer in the last 2 or 3 years. I think one thing I have to say is everybody in this room is an educated property professional, and that stands you out from the vast majority of people who, over the years, and the last 10 years, unless you lived on Mars, you could pretty much invest in anything and you would have made something. It's a very different ballgame today. It's a thinking man's game. Property is no longer something you can just go in and smack something at it. It doesn't work on that way. Like the guys are saying, regulation. I've been in the care home industry for 15 years, and that's one of the most heavily regulated industries in the country. So I know all about regulation, having dealt with it. And I think it's a good thing, because what it does is it separates the professionals from the pretenders in the industry. And there's been a lot of pretenders, and I think that gives a lot of people in this room an opportunity, because I think while there's all this chaos, while there's all this uncertainty, there lies the opportunity for the person who thinks things through, reverse engineers, looks at the end in mind and works from that. And I think if you do that, you end up with a very successful business model, particularly in the current climate, with all the ingredients that are there, whatever the political landscape, it doesn't make any difference. We as property professional people, we should take advantage of, with everything we know, with all the education that's within this room, and there's a huge amount of knowledge just sitting in this room today, not just in the panel, but everyone in the audience. And I think that's where you guys need to latch onto that, take that, and then move forward, because it puts you at a significant advantage outside anybody outside that door today. And I think that's the thing you need to take away from today. And that's something I've learned. The last 2 years, what I've learned, you've got to, and the thing is, you've got to do it. And no book or no course will teach you more than actually jumping in and getting your hands dirty and learning and talking to people who've done it. And there are many people, Richard, all these guys who are here are all much more experienced developers than I am. But the most important thing is that it's a constant learning curve. No matter how many projects you do, you never stop learning, because no two projects are ever the same. And it doesn't matter whatever happens in the landscape, you're only going to get better and better. And it's a roller coaster ride, but the key thing is if you get your things right, you get your ducks in a row, you learn and you move forward, you'll just get better and better. And I think that's the way you're going to look at it. I think the next 5 years are probably going to be the best 5 years if you're smart, definitely. Because it basically now, as the guys are saying, some of the bigger boys work for shareholders. So their ability to maneuver in a market which you have to sometimes move quickly is much more difficult. As an SME, you have that strategic ability to be able to move quickly, jump onto things without having to go to 5 levels of management or shareholders. It's a different ballgame, in my opinion. I'm not sure if the guys would agree, but that's pretty much, I think, where I think you can get onto things. And I think people are far more willing to talk. I've gone around and seen different sites, and I found that the level of conversation you can have with director vendors or people that own sites who traditionally would have maybe spoken to the bigger developers, they're actually now opening up to people like ourselves and saying, well, actually, you know what? There's a far more sensible conversation I'm having with you, because you're talking real numbers. You're talking real, because people have realised now the pie in the sky numbers was all jumped up purely because of the market. And I think the horrible B word and all the rest of it is all political humdrum, in my opinion. It's business as usual. It's just a question of you guys. That's all. Think that as background noise, because the politicians are all puppets in a puppet show, as far as I'm concerned, right? The rest of it goes on, and the people like us, as strictly business people, we wake up in the morning and we just get on with it. And the rest of it will just focus on what you can control and forget about what you can't control. Whether it's Boris or whether it's whoever, I don't even know half the other guys on the thing, but whoever they are, because it doesn't make any difference to me. It doesn't make any difference to me who is in there, because at the end of the day, and I think if you do that, I think you'll find that it's not as scary and it's unpredictable. I think there is predictability, depending. You just got to go out there and search for it. And I think it's there. It's all there for the taking.
I would add that as an SME, as a small business, you can innovate much easier than the big Berkeley homes or Shanley. You've got the capability of coming up with innovation and test it in small developments and see how that works and grow that. So obviously you need to know your systems and you need to know what you're bringing in. You know, but prefabrication, modular building. I don't know. We come up with ideas like modular internal partitions. Pocket doors, things that will give you space. The big developers are not using because they don't need to. They just churn through and they've got a system. You don't have a system, you can try and innovate, and that will bring you, a profit.
I mean, I'll share something happened today. I mean, I went to see our development in Reading today. We just launched our service apartments, and we had a lovely Australian couple that moved in. I think they're related to Shane Warne, actually. So big. It's all about cricket and everything else, which is quite topical at the moment, anyway. And what was wonderful is these are very well-travelled people, and they'd come to the apartments for the first time, and they said, and I said, I introduced myself. I said, this is first development, it's first time going into this market. And she goes, I've got to congratulate you. She says, because we've travelled around the world for 20 years, we've stayed in many, many places, and I have to say this is one of the nicest places we've stayed in. And that was massive, huge, in terms of... that says, all that hard work was worth it, right? Because that sort of endorsement you get unexpectedly for somebody who is, well-travelled, well-seasoned, well-to-do people was, I think is, and all I'm saying to you, I'm sharing that with you because it just says to you that don't be afraid. You may not have I don't have the experience. I mean, I can't build a garden shed for goodness sake. My point is that don't let that hold you back. For any people here who want to aspire to get into the development ladder, whether it's one flat or whether it's 50 flats, don't allow anything to inhibit yourself from doing that, because it can be. I'm testament from somebody who has no building background whatsoever, but it's a question of applying everything you can learn from places like this and learning from people in the panel and taking that forward. And we've got wonderful, I know Ben and Emily typically very well, and a lot of people in the room, working with professionals who are there to help and support you and tell you and sort of guide you away from some of the potential pitfalls that you can have in any development, however big or small they may be, is invaluable, absolutely invaluable. And I think, and hopefully, you can take that away from today. And I encourage everybody to, ask all the questions, because I think we're very, very, privileged to have an esteemed panel like we have here today. And I urge everyone in this room to ask anything you want, however stupid the question may seem. Believe you me, it's worth doing it now, because you'll get what you're going to get back is as I say, is invaluable.
Romey, I think you're absolutely right. In fact, did we actually get the answer to the question that I posed earlier, which was, what does a developer do? We got onto homes and communities, didn't we? But that's actually not really the answer to the question. The answer to the question is that a developer leads a team. Yeah? So a developer has to be a leader, right? So it's the job of the developer to check their emotion at the door, right? Put together an outstanding team of people who know their jobs incredibly well, and then lead them over the line. I'm sure Naman would agree with me. It's really, it requires courage to be a property developer, especially when you're asked questions like, oh, well, the market, there's a bit of worry in the market, are you still developing? Yes, you have to continue. You have to continue developing. It takes courage, but you have to do it. I was fortunate enough, again, to sit next to the head of development from Savills dinner at the end of last year, and I'm frustrated because I forget his name. But he said he wanted to see more punk developers. That was his phrase, punk developers. Yeah, they were fed up with these boring now vanilla developments that are going up all over the place, which were exciting 10 years ago, and he wanted to see some innovation, and he wanted to see something different. And that picks up on your point, which is that as SME or entrepreneurial developer, you do have the opportunity to innovate and do something different, yeah, with your team of incredible people. The Facebook guy, what's his name? Zuckerberg, that's the chap. So he says about hiring people, obviously people in a reasonable position, he says he would only ever hire someone that he would work for himself. Yeah? And when you're building your team as the leader, as the developer, when you're building that team, perhaps consider that from a guy who's built a company worth 500 billion with just 35,000 staff. That's quite amazing, isn't it? 500 billion, 35,000 staff. So consider that when you're thinking about either becoming a property developer or continuing on your journey.
Brilliant, guys. Next question. Go on, Andy.
In terms of sort of site appraisal, sort of purchase price aside, what are the sort of, I guess, the sort of basic 101s that you would look at when you're doing due diligence to from a planning point of view, when you're considering options for a site?
I think there's, from a planning perspective, your decisions about what your MO, what your build model is, affects so much about the way in which we would do a planning appraisal on a site. So, because there are just so many options. So I think when you're looking for sites, before you go and find a site, have an idea about what it is that you can do that's different, that you want to shoot after, that you want to be cut out as your piece of the market. It's not to say don't ignore every other opportunity that might exist, but have an idea about what sort of development you want to do. Do you want to knock down houses, build C1 hotels or apart hotels as your business model? Know that business, know that model, and shoot after that. That's why you get the McCarthy and Stones. They build retirement flats. When they look at a site, they're only looking at, can we do retirement flats? Because we know we can make this margin and this. And so
essentially, we have to look at a site in two different ways. There's general constraints and policies and things on a site that would apply to anything that you want to do in terms of, is it in the greenbelt, is it in the floodplain, is it next to a listed building? Those sort of designations or constraints will apply whatever proposal you do. And then there are separate proposals that relate just to, is it flats, is it new houses? And that's very specific to that particular scheme. So having an idea of what your sort of niche type of development is really good, because it allows you to look at a site and try and replicate a model over and over, and in time it will help you sift sites that you're looking at through as well.
Whereas if we get a planning appraisal and it's just a piece of land, and
what can I do with it?
You're going to be paying a lot of money for us to go through every single option, and we're not pricing, or we're not saying what the
most
financial
valuable
values are. We're just saying, well, you could do this, if that, and you'll just get overwhelmed with information and options.
What we do try and encourage clients is, where possible, to have a kind of plan B or a fallback position. So particularly for the HMO developers in the room, it's, if you look at a site, try and work out what the money would be at, say, a 6-bedroom HMO, where typically in most places you don't need planning permission, but where you might be trying to get, say, the 7th or the 8th bedroom out of a site. And if you get that, brilliant, you make bigger returns on it. But if you still buy the property anyway, you know that there's a fallback, that you can still break even or make money even at the
make sure the numbers work at the smallest level. So and then when you shoot higher than that, it's all pure profit then. But that's worth the risk, that's worth the gamble. But
I think you need to really also think ahead, and you need to think about the buildability of a site. Like Romey said earlier, no two sites are the same. So either you're going to trade that site on to someone else who's going to buy it with planning consent and build it out, or you're going to build it out yourself. So the constraints are still the same. So you need to consider things like party wall. Do you have a difficult neighbour next door? If so, how are you going to navigate your way? Is it a very constrained site? Do you have to build out from the back to the front? Do you have to use timber or this or that? You have to start thinking about these things quite early on, because it all impacts your build costs, and that impacts your site value. And really, you're going to start from the top and work yourself down to know what the fair value for the site is. So before you even put your planning in, you need to have your base appraisal of, okay, I could probably get between 6 and 9 here, but does it work at 6? Does it work at even 5? And these are the things that you need to ask yourself. So think about the construction, because a lot of people think, oh, roughly it's going to be £150 a square foot or £160 a square foot. But actually, depending on each site, it could skyrocket. And if you're doing a basement, it can go even higher, pound per square foot wise. So you need to think about these things in advance. That's the suggestion.
But that's a lot of what we do in pre-feasibility is to do with assessing what happens, next. And we come up with a lot of bad news sometimes, but we do. But it's better to stop you at pre-feasibility than go into feasibility. And so we have a sort of an overlook, and we look at, okay, how would you build it? How would you access this site? Is it in a town? Is it in the countryside? Is it floodplain? So there's a lot, but it's nothing that should be, should scare you in terms of should I not go there. Is let's assess it, let's have a look, and then you make your decision. Does it make sense to go and do my feasibility and then go on to doing my planning application and so on. So it's just step by step.
A lot of the conclusions we come out with in a planning appraisal is to say you need to talk to an architect to see whether can the roof be converted, is there the headroom, is there this...
We can give you the different strategies, but you need an architect to be able to design it.
There's a lot of crossover between the two different feasibility studies that we do.
And there's a lot of information that we both can come up with, but you need a little bit more from an architect, a little bit more from the planning person that will take you there. So it's widening the scope.
It's useful for us as professionals to know what you're shooting for as your end game. Just so that we can narrow down our time and tailor what we're looking at.
You need to have your what if scenarios. I mean, as a developer, you need to know your numbers and always expect the unexpected. Right? That's a given in any development, because no matter how much you plan, how much contingency you put into place, there's always things that are going to go slightly off tangent. That's going to take you, and most developments tend to go over time, sometimes over budget. Particularly when you've got a funder, when you've got a monitoring surveyor that's going to come out on site. If things aren't going to plan, he's going to put a bit of pressure on you. It's his responsibility to the bank. So I think what you've got to look at, I'm a big believer, as I say, in when you look at a site, I always look at, you always look at the bonanza, the realistic, and you get out of jail free card. Okay? And then how do I still get out of it with, and still keep my house, right? Right? So you've got to look at it from that perspective, and that's where the numbers play, and that's where you've got to start getting smart and be realistic. Look at numbers. You've got to make the numbers real, not pie in the sky. Don't. A lot of people go for hope value, right? Okay, that's where a professional will guide you in the right direction. So, the planners, the architects will give you the guidelines. They'll give you and then you've got to, and then I always believe it's always good, no disrespect to any of the professionals sitting here today, but it's always good to challenge. To say, well, okay, the gentleman sitting next to you will probably endorse me on this, where you look at a project and you look at something and then sometimes you get a bit of a bonus. It doesn't always happen. Sometimes you get a little bit of a Christmas present come early, as in my esteemed gentleman sitting next to you. But my point is that it doesn't always happen that way. More often than not, it's the other way. Right? But I think the key thing is that you go in there and you look at it with the numbers very much. It's a numbers game, because the make and break of a project is all about the numbers. Doesn't matter how you look at it. And I think somebody said earlier, you leave your heart at the door and you go in with your brain. Right? You don't go in there thinking it looks nice, the garden looks good, and all the rest of it. That's all nonsense. If the numbers don't work, walk away. Simple as that. And I think.
So I'd like to take a step back in time instead of looking for plan B, C, and look to how do you even get to the table? I mean, I'm talking to a lot of colleagues in the area, and they all say, I've been looking at 10 or 20 or 100 or God knows how many potential deals, and I can't find the deal. I was taken by you mentioning Barclay Homes, and they bought, how many sites was it? Thousands. Yeah. And then contrasting that with, I think, what I would call the reality, which is the number of us who are actually looking and, switching between either desperation or, and almost giving up, because there's, I've done this so many times over, and I do not get to the table. And if I get to the table, I'm just being wiped out from the table again. It doesn't happen. So the practical question is, how do you go about finding a site? And I think the more difficult part of the question is, how do you deal with yourself in that situation? Because it's just really hard. Right? And it takes a long time, and they need to be prepared to be knocked down, I don't know so many times, before you even get to talk to the planners or the architects, or, sorry, but, there needs to be a deal, on the table that you control before you even get to all these other things.
But I think you need to have the right strategy for your area. So the build to sell model can be very challenging in certain areas. Prices have come off a little bit, or units are taking longer to sell, and price of construction is going up, so build to sell is starting to be squeezed. So maybe think about doing something else. I mean, certainly, property, but maybe not a build to sell, maybe a build to rent, some sort of commercial play. As if all you're doing is, it's very soul destroying, isn't it? If you're just going to site after site after site and you can't make them work, but they're selling to somebody else and you're scratching your head thinking, how have they made that work at that number? I don't understand. How can that site go for £1 million when I could only make it work at 600,000? Maybe they've got a different strategy that just costs less to do, has a better GDP.
I think that's why. That's a really good idea in terms of the strategy, and I think that's why over the years this whole thing about the prior approval for change of use has just really taken off among the developer world. I mean, office to residential has just been done to death across the country because people are seeing an opportunity and seeing an ability to make residential properties without having as much of the huge construction costs, because you're just changing the use of the existing building. So that's why I'm excited about seeing changes like the takeaways to residential coming in, because it just broadens your options at sites to look at. And quite often properties that, yes, they can be at the smaller scale, but we've also done changes of use of buildings into sort of 100 apartments. So you don't have to just think about one little shop changing use. It can be quite large properties that you can find. But commercial units can often be cheaper to buy or have less competition, and give you a good sort of profit margin as well, because you're not necessarily doing this construction to build to sell.
No, that's absolutely right. So those people investing in commercial property in the room, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3. How many people in the room this evening? 50?
50 plus.
50 plus? Okay, so you've got 3 people in commercial property out of 50, and 47 out of 50 in residential. You do the maths.
Half the property in the country is commercial competition.
Actually, the PD rights, look, come on, they've been amazing, haven't they? For any developer in the room, PD's been incredible, because it took out of the equation the biggest barrier to any property development, which is the planning department at the local authority. And they hated it, didn't they? Let's face it, they hated PD, right? They still do, right? So actually, just as the people who jumped on commercial office to resi in 2013 made fortunes, right? Those that jump on takeaway to resi in 2019, perhaps that's the new gold rush, right? Because if you think about it, it's virtually impossible, is it not, to get a mortgage above a fast food restaurant. Yes. So you've got all these uppers which are just sort of, not doing much. Nobody wants to live there because the neighbour, they've got stinky pizza downstairs or whatever, right? And just as in 2013 when it was office to resi, and some smart people really understood the law and went, okay, let's go for it. I remember hearing about office to resi in 2013 and going, that can't be true. I'm just going to stick to doing what I'm doing. And I'm kicking myself now because it was proper gold rush territory. So maybe that's, taking advantage of being absolutely up to date on legislative changes, because they do move the market.
I think
that could be your route, perhaps.
Absolutely, and I think sometimes it's using the planning system as a stepping stone to getting what you want. So, for example, with some of these prior approvals or the permitted development, that in itself may not be your business plan, but we've just done a scheme in Reading where we got prior approval to change the use of a retail unit into residential, so that's been approved. But we've now submitted a wider planning application for a bigger part of the site to subdivide a whole building and extend it into apartments using that space. But what we're saying to the council is we've already got this fallback position that the retail is going to be lost anyway. So suddenly under your planning policies where you might try and resist an employment use, you can't do that because we've already established this position where it can be residential. And that was my point earlier with the appeal decisions, where we'd had a couple back where as planners we'd made a really sensible logical argument of you should be granting this because if you can't we can do this anyway, and the appeal inspector is saying no, unless you've got that piece of paper showing me it's permitted development, I'm not going to take that into account. So that's, for us, that's a really big learning lesson, that instead of us just trying to make an argument, we're actually getting a piece of paper. So it's just using it as a stepping stone. You don't have to build that, but use it.
We use the PD rights to knock out some of the key issues that the council are going to be targeting you for when you go for your bigger scheme. So if you're going for a pub conversion, for example, loads of authorities really struggle with letting go of their community pubs. There's a lot of public resistance to it. So it's then, what's the strategy that you go through to eliminate that from the argument? You want to...
Nobody goes to the pub anymore, but there's a lot of resistance.
There's still a lot of resistance to it, yeah. So massive amount of resistance to it. So we've got pubs that have been empty for a decade, but still the council's trying to protect it.
So is there an argument to get around it?
There are, site to site, depends on local policies, but there's either prior approval routes that we use to kind of establish the loss is demonstrated, or quite often, if it's been marketed for a certain amount of time, we can take the evidence from the estate agents and get a marketing report put together to be able to demonstrate that there's just no market for it, so they can't justify.
I think that what they're saying is that someone like Emily and Dan can come up with a strategy. And it's not just look at, okay, how can I get this through? Sometimes you have to go through, jumping through strong hoops. But if you've got that strategy in place, and you've got something that says, okay, if everything fails, I've still got this property development, I can do something with it, then you may just take that risk. And I was like, okay, how can we go ahead with this? So it is looking at it in a very sort of strategic way.
And even on a really small site, we can go down the PD route or the prior approval route to establish a larger property, but then you might be able to subdivide that property into apartments. I mean, we did that exact scheme with Shivani in Didcot. We extended a property, we looked at what we would be able to achieve, and then got planning permission to subdivide a house into apartments. So it's, there's lots of different options out there that you can sort of take advantage of.
There are some really simple. I had a client in Maiden here that he wanted to super maximize this site, this house, as he was coming back from Saudi Arabia with a big family. And we just started to plan us out because we tried this, we tried that, and then the accumulation of all the permissions that we obtained actually gave him the house. He had to build it because we only had 3 years. He had to build it because we had permission to do that, the porch, so it was an accumulation. So he was very patient to actually go step by step as we planned it, and deal with all the issues with party wall and the neighbours. So it is about having that strategy. Can actually, if you're really interested in a site, it's just really working it out.
I'd be interested to see the points of view as well on Tim's question, isn't it? Because only you're doing a lot of sites. How are you finding those sites? Because obviously we can't.
It is very tough. It's something that I think all developers find tough. And I think the one thing you'll see around the world, that property is very localised. Hopefully, a Barclay Group is very different, entity altogether. But generally, if you look anywhere around the world, it's very, very specific to that particular patch. And I almost had this scattergun approach initially, where I was going to different places and speaking to agents from different boroughs and areas that belong to different councils, and that doesn't work very well because you don't stick. And I think a big part of my business now is to confine myself to an area within West London where I've got some traction. So people drive past my site, agents will call me, even certain prospective buyers will call me, contractors will call me that operate within that area. And that's really where you build your name. And once you build your name in that area, then you can move to another one. But yeah, I completely sympathise with what you say.
I think the other thing I'll mention to you is that I think sometimes, we all talk about residential development. I think the office to resi conversion steam train has created another opportunity for people wanting to create serviced offices as well. A lot of people think about converting B1 to C3, but I think that has also created an opportunity. And I know some developers now who are getting, high premium rents for service because there's just not any left in certain areas.
That was the other change that's just come in, is that you can now change A-class uses into office space because all the offices are turned into residential, and now there's no office.
And I think in Emily's presentation you saw betting shops. Now William Hill closing several hundred, if not thousands. I think that's a real opportunity there.
There's something local councils hate.
Yeah, betting
developers, it's betting shops.
Yeah.
So that's something that potentially is an interesting.
They won't worry about loss of employment.
No, absolutely. But that's already done. I said they've already decided they're going to close them, and I don't think there'll be any love lost for them as far as the council is concerned. So I think that's the way you've got to look at it: is look at the political, look at the landscape, and obviously Emily's touched on some of the points in her presentation. And I think that there's some real golden nuggets in there that potentially you can take away. But don't be, if you are looking, if you can't find anything that doesn't stack from a residential, and that's quite tough, finding something to stack, particularly, whether it's built to sell or built to rent, even on the built to rent schemes, valuers are under increasing pressure to put down value GDVs now. And remember, a lot of these projects are 18, 24 months, and unless you've got a crystal ball, you're never quite sure. And what you don't want is at the end of 18, 24 months, suddenly he devalues it at 20% and suddenly your profits have been wiped out. So that's something to bear in mind. So I think, I think you've got to start being innovative, creative in thinking and looking at projects where most people will look at it. And as I said, I think the people like Tony Pigeon and stuff do look at buying many sites. This is going back to your question, Tim, earlier, is that what someone sees as a site is their perspective in their pair of glasses, and a smart property developer will look at that site in a very different way and can come up with a scheme which potentially that person hasn't seen or many other people haven't seen. And that's what I think you need to take from looking at different assets.
I think that's so absolutely right. And also in terms of the social, what's happening in towns, that the high streets are dying off, and now there's a sense of, we need to revive them. And there's a lot of, I've been involved with things like co-housing, people that want to buy a property and do it up and retire there. They don't want to go into a home as elder people.
Absolutely.
Or they want to work together. So they want to have a place where they can work and have workshops perhaps. And so there are lots of opportunities in terms of, just look at how socially we are changing, how we want to work, how we want to live. And that's something that, as an architect, I observe a lot because I'm so intrigued about the towns and how they change and how they adapt. But it is true, that they are changing. And I think if you can be that little bit ahead and say, there's something here, people will want, for example, have a nice place to take your children to play, soft play, and have a nice coffee and not be in a dingy little basement. And there's some clients of mine that come up with a jelly lounge that is, it's sort of more of a posh place to take your children, but you can actually work while your children are playing, and it's for mums and dads that work from home, but they can socialise, and they're making loads of money just by having observed what was needed in Windsor. It was the need. And they can take their children to play, they can have lunch, they can work there.
Yeah, no, I think there's 2 points to remember. First, there's still a massive housing shortage in this country. That's going to be probably for most of our lifetime, I suspect. And secondly, the retail landscape as we know it is changing significantly. And I think those are 2 areas that offers again opportunity in terms of how you approach local councils. And I think local councils, I've been a care home operator for 15 years, and I'm fortunate enough to get invited to a lot of council meetings because most of them are absolutely clueless about how they're going to deal with the ageing population in this country. And I mean, it's a serious problem. From not just from a healthcare point of view, but also for a lot of them are living in property not fit for purpose. And I think that again offers another interesting opportunity. What I find amazing is people like McCarthy and Stone. I mean, I was shocked. They have about 68% of the market for retirement home, which I think is unbelievable. I mean, I'm amazed that nobody has even attempted to go down that road because, crikey, if you have 68% of a market, That's pretty
It's quite
unbelievable.
something, isn't it?
Yeah, and they've got no competition. I mean, if you talk about retirement home operators, McCarthy and Stone, I can't even think of the second or third one, to be honest. Right? Yeah, but I mean, as I said, you're struggling. You're struggling. You know, it's not. I mean, house builders, you could rattle them off all day long. And I think this is what you've got to. I think, you know, as budding developers or operators in the room today, I think what you've got to do, and I think guys touched on earlier, is find an area, find a niche, make it yours, brand it, and I think you'll become very successful. And you could become the Apple or Microsoft of that niche, whatever that niche might be. And I think that's the way you've got to look at it. Don't dare to be different, and go out there and challenge the system, because I think now people want change. Tenants don't want to live in squalor anymore. First-time buyers won't buy crap anymore. Taylor Wimpey doesn't cut anymore. So what I'm trying to say to you is that whether it's a buyer or whether it's a tenant, you know, what they would accept 10 years ago, I can tell you now they will not accept today.
So the most interesting HMO I've ever seen was an HMO, C4 HMO, 6 people living there. They were all in their 80s and 90s, and there was care provided. And they basically formed a social community club to pay for the care to come in.
It's really strange, because I had this conversation with somebody earlier about if HMOs is all, you know, saturated and it's dead and great. I said, yes, it depends on how you want to look at it. How many HMO providers are there that do for over 55s only? None. Nobody. There isn't a single HMO provider in this country that has an over 55 scheme where the HMOs are only for that sector. And believe you me, if you do that, the council will support you, they'll give you grants, they'll even probably relax the licensing rule, the whole shebang, and they make the best tenants because they don't trash it.
You're so right. There was actually, I was at Wokeham's planning committee last month, and there was an application to turn a hotel that had closed down into basically a very large HMO, sort of 30 bedrooms or so. It didn't meet with the council's bedroom standards, but it was for older people and people in need. It was actually run by a charity, and the council was so blown away with what the charity were doing and the sort of meeting the need and who it was for, that a lot of those things kind of...
Exactly. And that's my point.
Romey, I think you've raised probably the most important point of all. Is if you want endless deals in your location, solve the problem. And the biggest problem that the UK is facing is the baby boomer generation. That generation that kicked off in 1946, when all those brave souls returned from the war, and they were very pleased to see each other, and they made lots of babies. And actually you can track the impact of that generation in every decade. So you had the 60s, which was wild because the baby boomers were in their 20s and there were so many of them, and so they changed. There was huge social change. Then in the 70s, the baby boomers were starting to grow up a little bit, and you had a boom actually in second-hand car sales. Interestingly, because the baby boomers wanted to buy cars about that time. So that was when the whole sort of Del Boy generation was born, around selling cars. They were making fortunes. And you could just track the impact of that baby boomer generation. And now, today, there is a record number of 70-year-olds in the UK. And tomorrow, there will be a new record of 70-year-olds. And every day, for the next however many years, there will be a record number of 70-year-olds in this country, and we are a million miles away from our governments being able to fund this. There is no chance. All we're going to see in politics from now on is this polarization. We're going to have radical right saying, kick out all the immigrants, then everything will be fine, and we'll have the radical left saying, we can pay for everything and we'll just tax the rich and everything will be fine, and you'll just have this seesaw, and it's all down. You can track it all back to the impact of the baby boomer generation. So if you can solve a problem that is faced by the baby boomer generation, you will be tremendously wealthy, and there'll be no end of deals. So for example, Alzheimer's. Who's talking about Alzheimer's? Not many people. There's some charities beating the drum for Alzheimer's, but it's one of the fastest growing conditions because it's a condition of the baby boomer generation, right? So build a nice team, get some care professionals together. There's a tremendous care professional at the other end of this. What are we? We're a panel. Yes. Forgive me. You have to forgive me. You have to forgive me. But I was speaking in Leicester last night, and I drove home from Leicester between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. and I got 4 hours sleep last night, and I'm here. So I'm a little forgetful when I'm tired. So this is a panel. Build a team, solve a problem for the baby boomer generation, and that's what entrepreneurship is all about.
One of the interesting things with planning policy is in some instances it hasn't moved on. So they class older persons accommodation as over 55s, and you'll still find permissions being granted today that is for accommodation for over 55. And that's
really.
Can I just ask the panel a question about going back to the high streets and councils and commissions? If you're in a town, for example, that obviously typical of most towns in the UK where the retail trade is done, the shops are closed. If you're the first one, for example, to ones who approach the council with wish to convert from office or retail to residential, how does the council feel about that in terms of establishing a precedent? Because that would surely open the floodgates for the rest of the town.
If you're doing it under prior approval, the council can't argue the principle.
This is what's magic about that process, is it's stipulation from government that you only have to meet set criteria, and as long as you meet those criteria, whether the council like it or not, you would be granted
the prior approval system cuts out a load of the consideration and objection points the council would normally raise.
So where do you think this is then going for the high streets?
Well, it's some councils, if you're in a primary shopping frontage, a lot of councils will have a very specifically designated high street. And those areas are actually exempt usually from the prior approval process. So if you have an A1 retail unit, and it's there, and one of those exemptions in the prior approval legislation is for that particular reason, is to try and preserve it. It doesn't mean that you can't change. So we had a planning application recently for an A1 retail unit. It had been vacant for 6 months, and our client wanted to use it for a tanning salon for sunbeds. And that's classed as a sui generis use. And so we applied for a change of use application, and all we had to do was submit a marketing report from the estate agent to say that it had been vacant for 6 months. They'd had no interest whatsoever from any other A1 retail providers. This was somebody else. He was creating employment because there would be a receptionist and a cleaner, and it keeps the unit open. And I've got planning permission. It's much better to keep a unit in use for something else, whether that's residential or commercial, but that's where the opportunities can be.
I think the high street problem is there's a combination of factors that are influencing that quite negatively. One is business rates, rent prices, and planning legislation, all separate legislative mechanisms, all working against normal retail uses. So I think what needs to happen is the retail high street needs to consolidate down to a concentrated area, because where you've got the vitality and the interaction going on, they're still doing really well, high streets, but where there's just been so many over disparate large areas, they're really struggling. So actually there needs to be that transition in the system to put offices in, because people don't, the transition is in office culture is to come out of the big open plan offices. They're getting really unpopular amongst employees. So there's a big push actually to go into smaller, more intimate working environments, which is where the small 60 square metre spaces are doing really, really well. So if you can figure out a business model to make Rent-A-Desk work out of a small office with a franchise cafe or something like that attached to it.
And now we've got prior approval to use commercial space for offices. Great.
So you've then all of a sudden got fantastic.
But there's also the social change that we can actually work from anywhere in the world, and freelance, and so people are working from home, bringing up the children, so that is actually encouraging people to stay local, not to travel too far.
That's why when you walk past any Starbucks now, certainly around Windsor, Ascot, Maidenhead area, Starbucks are full of people working. because it's that cultural transition that's happening. There's free Wi-Fi, there's coffee, there's cake,
Plug sockets.
Plug sockets available, and lots of small tables where you can sit and work.
Coffee and cake.
So it's looking, it's that thing of watch, see where the culture's going. And if you can do that with a creche next door, then you've got the same model that.
Absolutely, a jelly lounge.
I've got an idea for you. Yeah. So across the country, you have villages now where the village shops close down because you can't make any money, right? So take a short lease on the shop and just put vending machines in. No staff costs, just vending machines. Be great for the village because they finally got somewhere where they can go and buy a can of Coke and a Mars bar. And it's amazing what you can get out of a vending machine now. Bacon sandwich, pizza.
Yeah, the only problem is nobody carries any cash.
Contact us. There's an income strategy for you. I have 10%. Everybody saw.
About 10% of the gross.
Kevin Green? No. Tell me later.
So guys, time for one last question. Who's going to ask that question? Silence.
Go on, then I'll ask it.
Okay, go on.
If you've got like £1 million, what would you do with it? Where would you invest it and why?
Are you asking me?
Yeah,
all
of you. It doesn't really matter. Where do you think the key growth is?
You're presumably asking me where I would invest it in property?
Yeah.
Or in industry per se?
No, property.
Property?
So would you do commercial to resi? Would you do office to resi?
Well, I think right now I would be I'd be doing sheds. Not garden sheds, big like warehouses, yeah. And I'd grow medical marijuana in them. So there you are.
I've already looked at that. As a pharmacist, I've already looked at that. It's a good business.
There's a fallback option.
Everybody want to invest?
Absolutely. And hovering in their drones across the country.
Now, what would you invest your £1 million in?
I always advise to stick to what you know, especially at a time where a lot of people feel like it's fairly uncertain. And I always invest. Personally, I like investing in a new build because I know my construction costs the variance will be a lot less than it would be in, argument's sake, a PD scheme, where the structural integrity of the building might be something different and your cost might be a lot higher. And I generally like easier planning games. So I like planning game where I'm doing C3, existing dwelling, demolish it, erect 9 flats, also C3. So you know you've got the existing value still there. So as well as looking at growth, you also have to look at wealth preservation. So as much as I want to make your $1 million into $2 million, just make sure you don't lose $1 million as well. I think that's also another important point. So my advice would be to stick to it.
That's just a sum. I haven't got £1 million.
Sandra, where did you invest?
Well, I was saying invest in yourself. Invest in yourself and travel and have a good time.
Oh,
I'm going philosophical.
That's a lot of travel.
Sandra, another gang.
Have fun.
Where do you see the opportunity?
Well, we're just in terms of investing in. Well, for us, we would be investing in our own company. We're just expanding. We're just taking on a lease on a new building. We're moving into a new home. I'd like to try and buy out that building if we had £1 million, plus get a few more staff and just really work on it.
But in terms of gaps in the property market, where would you?
I'd buy a farm. Because I've already got the shed where I can put the medical marijuana. There's prior approval rights around developing out some of the buildings and farms. The lobbying that goes into the rural industry is actually really significant. So there are a phenomenal number of opportunities for existing farm sites to do some quite significant diversification opportunities. And quite often they're central employers for a whole community, so there's a whole economy that revolves around farms. Traditional farming is dying as a business model in the UK, and there's a huge amount of change happening in that industry. And so, as being a landowner in that environment, property and the opportunities around that is massive. Or certainly in the next 5 to 10 years, is going to go something significant, I think.
I think I've probably touched on that already. I've got a really good idea in terms of, and I touched on it in terms of the baby boom that Richard touched on there as well. I'd love to buy a plot of land. I've seen this up in Vista, where you can buy you create a plot of land and divide them up into about 20 or 30 different divisions, and you allow somebody who wants to downsize, someone who's lived in a property, brought up their kids and everything else, and say, right, this property is no longer fit for purpose anymore, and now I would like to build my final house the way I want it, and you give them a plot passport, and they can build it, whether it's a Dubai style house or something from the Cotswolds, and that scheme exists today. So I'd like to, if I've had the opportunity.
There's a lot of planning policy support for self-build.
But self-build for the over 55 scheme again, and that I think will have a lot of opportunity.
And the co-housing, I'm working with a couple of
that's
groups that are looking at co-housing where they share the land and they build, self-build.
You come up with some Jaffas today.
So that's the sort of thing I'd look at. I think because as I said, I always look at the one thing I've learned is there's one thing that's a certainty, and I think there's no question what happens politically, whatever the interest, that population is going to do exponentially over the next 10, 15 years, and that's a given. So go for a market, that's a given. Everything else, I think there's too many variables, but that's it. Because they are, as I said, there are a lot of people. One of the things I've noticed is that growing up, when somebody said to me, "What's your picture of a 65 or 70-year-old person?" It was, probably in a walking stick or in a wheelchair. But I'm just saying, it's known for today. The average 70-year-old is mortgage-free, kids-free, everything, surplus income, final salary pension, on a golf course, and driving an open-top Aston Martin. And I think to myself, they are the grey pounders. I call it is a great market, really good market, because we all look at the 25 to 45-year-old who generally are skint, right? And are just because they've got so many things to have to deal with, kids, this, that, and the other. And I think it's that generation that I think have bought property when it was tuppence halfpenny, and now they're worth. You know what I mean? So they have lived their life where they've benefited from such a surge in property prices. And I think that's why, so really, I'd like to give McCarthy and Stone a run for their money, because they've got too much market share, and if they lose 10% of it, it ain't going to bother them, and 10% of that share will do me very well.
Well, on that note, a big, massive round of applause.